Story 1. Story 1, The Whispering Sands. The chopper's roar faded, swallowed by the vastness of the Afghan desert. Dust devils danced across the barren landscape, their swirling forms mimicking the unease churning in my stomach. Operation Desert Whisper. The name itself felt ominous. We were a small reconnaissance team, dropped miles from the nearest outpost, tasked with investigating unusual seismic activity. It all seemed routine, standard desert-op stuff, until the sun dipped below the horizon. "Anything, Ramirez?" I asked, adjusting the night vision goggles. "Nada, Sergeant." "Just sand and wind," Ramirez replied, his voice crackling through the comms. The wind. That was the first thing that felt off. It wasn't the hot, dry wind I'd grown accustomed to. This wind was cold, almost damp, carrying a low, guttural whisper that seemed to claw at the edges of my sanity. I dismissed it as fatigue. We'd been on the move for 18 hours. We set up camp, the silence broken only by the sporadic bursts of static from our radios. The whispers continued, growing louder, almost intelligible, weaving themselves into unsettling phrases. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, like thousands of tiny insects crawling over me. Ramirez seemed unaffected. "You hear that, Sergeant?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hear what, sir?" "The wind?" He gave me a confused look. I didn't press it. Maybe it was just me. The exhaustion, the isolation, it could be playing tricks on my mind. I tried to rationalize it away, but the whispers persisted, growing in intensity. I could almost understand them now, fragmented words that hinted at something ancient, something malevolent. The next day, the seismic readings spiked. We moved towards the epicenter, the landscape growing increasingly bizarre. The sand dunes shifted and contorted, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe and pulsate in the periphery. I felt a constant, oppressive weight on my chest, as if the very air was suffocating me. Ramirez remained oblivious. "This place gives me the creeps, Sergeant," I muttered, wiping the sweat from my brow. "Just rocks and sand, sir. Nothing to worry about." He shrugged, seemingly unfazed by the increasingly disturbing surroundings. Then, the tremor started. The ground beneath our feet vibrated, the dunes rippling like waves in a silent, sandy ocean. The whispers escalated into a chorus of guttural voices, echoing across the desolate landscape. The shapes in the periphery became more defined, more monstrous. Long, spindly limbs, jagged claws, and glowing, crimson eyes. "Ramirez, do you see that?" I stammered, pointing towards a particularly large and grotesque form emerging from the sand. He squinted, then shook his head. "See what, sir?" "There's nothing there." Panic clawed at my throat. I was losing my grip on reality. The creatures, the whispers, the shifting sands, was it all in my head? Or was Ramirez, was he blind to it all? The tremors intensified. The ground cracked open, revealing a vast chasm that stretched as far as the eye could see. From the depths of this abyss, the creatures emerged, dozens of them, their forms shifting and swirling like the dust devils that had greeted us upon our arrival. They were tall and gaunt, their skin a sickly, translucent white, their limbs impossibly long and thin, ending in razor-sharp claws. Their heads were small and elongated, with gaping mouths filled with needle-like teeth. And their eyes, those crimson eyes, burned with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. Ramirez still saw nothing. He continued to scan the horizon, oblivious to the horrors unfolding around us. I screamed, a primal scream of pure terror, but my voice was lost in the cacophony of guttural whispers and the grinding of the earth. The creatures advanced, their movements unsettlingly fluid, their eyes fixated on me. I raised my rifle, my hands trembling, but I knew it was futile. There were too many of them. As they closed in, the whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, chilling voice that resonated deep within my skull. "Join us," it hissed. "Become one with the whispering sands." I squeezed the trigger, emptying the magazine into the nearest creature. The bullets passed through it as if it were made of smoke. The creature didn't even flinch. Then, everything went black. I woke up hours later, the sun beating down on my face. The chasm was gone. The creatures were gone. The whispers were gone. Ramirez was standing over me, a look of concern on his face. "You all right, Sergeant?" he asked. "You passed out." Must have been the heat. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest. The desert stretched out before me, silent and empty. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion and isolation? Then, I saw it. A single, crimson eye, staring back at me from beneath the shifting sands. It blinked, then disappeared. Ramirez saw nothing. We were extracted the next day. No explanation was given for the seismic activity. The official report cited it a minor geological anomaly. No one believed me. They said I was suffering from PTSD, that the desert had gotten to me. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know they're still out there, lurking beneath the whispering sands, waiting, watching. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I can still hear them whispering. Story 2. Story 2, The Whispering Sands. The Afghan sun beat down, relentless and unforgiving. Dust, fine as talcum powder, clung to everything, my skin, my uniform, the inside of my nostrils. I squinted, the glare bouncing off the endless expanse of sand dunes. It was my second tour, and the monotony was a physical weight. We were on patrol, routine stuff, supposed to be back at the FOB before nightfall. Sergeant Miller, a gruff but fair man, chewed on a piece of jerky, his eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing but rocks and sand, Private Johnson muttered beside me, adjusting his helmet. "Keep your eyes peeled, Johnson," Miller barked back, "complacency kills quicker than a Taliban bullet." The radio crackled. Static. Then a voice, distorted and faint. "Alpha Team, do you copy? Strange readings, north, investigate." Miller frowned. "Dispatch, this is Alpha Team, we copy, but the signal's breaking up." "What kind of readings?" "More static." Then, a chilling whisper, barely audible, "They're watching." The hair on the back of my neck prickled. The sun seemed to dim, the air growing colder. "Dispatch, repeat last," Miller demanded, his voice tight. Silence. Only the wind, whispering through the dunes. We pressed northward, the unease growing with every step. The familiar landscape started to feel alien, hostile. The silence, broken only by the crunch of our boots on the sand, became oppressive, amplifying the growing sense of dread. "What the hell was that on the radio?" Johnson asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Just interference," Miller said, but his eyes darted nervously around the desolate landscape. Hours passed. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and violet. The beauty felt obscene, a mockery of the fear that gnawed at us. Then, we saw it. A structure, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It rose from the sand like a blackened tooth, its surface shimmering in the fading light. No windows, no doors, just a smooth, obsidian-like surface reflecting the dying embers of the day. "What in God's name?" Miller muttered, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. We approached cautiously, our boots sinking into the unexpectedly soft sand around the structure. A low humming sound emanated from within, resonating deep in our chests. It felt like the beating of a monstrous heart. As we drew closer, symbols, etched into the black surface, became visible. Unfamiliar, ancient, they seemed to writhe and shift before my eyes. I felt a dizzying wave of nausea. "Stay back," I heard myself say, my voice trembling. Johnson, his face pale, took a step back, stumbling into me. "There's something wrong," he whispered, his eyes wide with terror. Suddenly, the humming intensified, the ground vibrating beneath our feet. The symbols on the structure glowed with an eerie, internal light. I felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing me towards the obsidian surface. I tried to resist, but my legs felt like lead. "We need to get out of here." Miller yelled, his voice strained. He grabbed Johnson by the arm and pulled him back. I wanted to follow, but the pull was too strong. I felt my hand reaching out, drawn towards the glowing symbols. Then, the whispers started. Faint at first, then growing louder, surrounding me, penetrating my thoughts. They weren't words, not exactly. More like sensations. Fear, despair, loneliness. The vast, indifferent emptiness of the universe pressing down on me, crushing me. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the whispering sands. I felt my fingers brush against the cold, smooth surface of the structure. The symbols burned into my skin, a searing pain that was simultaneously physical and something else. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in the whispers, the world around me dissolving into a swirling vortex of fear and nothingness. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the humming stopped. The symbols faded, the pull released. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. Miller and Johnson were gone. The desert stretched out before me, silent and empty. The structure was gone, as if it had never been there. Only the sand remained, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. The sun had set. I was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. I started walking, driven by a primal need to escape, to find something, anything, familiar. But the desert stretched on, an endless, shifting landscape of shadows and whispers. The stars emerged, cold and distant, offering no comfort. I walked for hours, maybe days. I lost track of time. The whispers never ceased, a constant reminder of the emptiness, the vast indifference of the universe. They were inside me now, a part of me. Eventually, I stumbled upon a patrol. They found me babbling incoherently, clutching a handful of sand. They took me back to the FOB. I tried to explain what I had seen, what I had heard, but the words wouldn't come. They thought I was suffering from PTSD, from the heat, from the war. They medicated me, sedated me. They don't believe me. They think it's all in my head. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know the whispers are still there, lurking in the silence, waiting. The desert is vast. And it remembers. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I can still feel the pull, the cold touch of the obsidian surface against my skin. And I hear the whispers in the sand, reminding me of the emptiness that awaits us all. And I wonder, are they watching? Are they waiting? And what will happen when they return? Story 3. Story 3, The Whispering Jungle. The humid air hung heavy, a damp blanket clinging to my skin. Vietnam, 1968. My name is Corporal David Riley, and I wasn't cut out for this. Not the war, not the jungle. Especially not the jungle. We were on a routine patrol, 6 of us, hacking through thick foliage so dense it felt like we were swimming through green. Sergeant Miller, a grizzled veteran with eyes that had seen too much, led the way. Behind him, Johnson, O'Malley, Hernandez, Cooper, and me, bringing up the rear. The usual banter, tired jokes about stale rations and pin-up girls back home, echoed through the humid air. Normal. Ordinary. Until it wasn't. It started subtly. A faint rustling in the undergrowth, deeper than the usual scurry of unseen creatures. I dismissed it, the jungle was alive, after all. Then, a whispering. Low, almost indistinguishable from the rustling leaves, but distinctly vocal. I glanced at Cooper, his face pale and strained. He'd heard it too. Hear that? I whispered. He just nodded, his eyes wide, scanning the dense foliage. Probably monkeys, Johnson said from further up, his voice forced and unconvincing. Nobody believed him. The whispering grew louder, weaving through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't monkey chatter. It sounded like voices. Hundreds of voices, just below the threshold of hearing, whispering secrets in a language we didn't understand. The air grew colder, a stark contrast to the oppressive humidity. A shiver ran down my spine. The jungle felt different, hostile. The familiar sounds of insects and birds had vanished, replaced by the insidious whispering. "Sergeant?" O'Malley's voice was tight with fear. Miller stopped, his hand raised, signaling us to halt. He stood motionless, listening. The whispering intensified, swirling around us, pressing in. "Spread out," Miller finally said, his voice low and tense. "Keep your eyes open. Something's not right." We fanned out, the dense foliage making it difficult to see each other. The whispers seemed to follow me, clinging to my ears, burrowing into my mind. I clutched my M16 tighter, my heart pounding against my ribs. The light began to fade, the jungle canopy swallowing the last rays of the setting sun. The darkness brought a new level of terror. The whispering became louder, more insistent, punctuated by occasional guttural clicks and pops that sounded disturbingly organic. Then, the trees began to move. Not swaying in the breeze, but shifting, twisting, as if something enormous was pushing through them. We huddled together, our fear palpable. The whispering became a cacophony, drowning out all other sounds. The air grew thick with an unfamiliar, sickly sweet scent. "What the hell is that?" Hernandez whispered, his voice trembling. I followed his gaze. Through the tangled vines, I saw it. A shape. Large, dark, pulsating. It seemed to be made of the jungle itself, vines and leaves woven together into a grotesque parody of a human form. It moved slowly, deliberately, towards us, the whispers emanating from its direction. We opened fire. The staccato bursts of our rifles echoed through the jungle, but the bullets seemed to have no effect. The shape continued its advance, unfazed. The whispering grew louder, almost deafening. Panic set in. O'Malley screamed and ran, disappearing into the darkness. We didn't see him again. The shape was closer now, and I could see details that made my stomach churn. Vines writhed and pulsed beneath a thin layer of leaves, forming limbs that ended in long, sharp thorns. Its head was a mass of twisted roots, with two glowing red points that seemed to bore into me. The whispering was now a roar, vibrating through my very bones. We continued to fire, our bullets tearing through the foliage, but the shape kept coming. Johnson screamed as a vine lashed out, wrapping around his leg and pulling him towards the monstrous form. His screams were quickly cut short. Miller, his face contorted in terror, yelled, "Run! Scatter!" We didn't need telling twice. We turned and fled, the whispering chasing us through the darkness. I ran blindly, stumbling over roots and vines, the roar of the whispering filling my ears. I lost track of Cooper and Hernandez. I was alone. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, the whispering always behind me, always close. I don't know how long I ran, or how far. Finally, I collapsed, exhausted and terrified, at the base of a giant banyan tree. The whispering subsided, fading into the background noise of the jungle. I lay there, panting, trying to catch my breath. The jungle was silent, except for the distant chirping of crickets. The normal jungle sounds. Had it all been a nightmare? A hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion? Then, I heard it again. A faint rustling in the undergrowth. Closer this time. And the whispering. Soft, low, but unmistakable. It was coming from behind the banyan tree. I slowly turned my head, my heart pounding in my chest. I peered around the thick trunk of the tree, my eyes straining to see through the darkness. And then I saw it. A single, glowing red point, staring back at me from the darkness. The whispering intensified, and I heard the rustling of leaves as something large began to move behind the tree. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the whispering chasing me once more into the heart of the whispering jungle. I haven't stopped running since. I don't know what it was, or what it wanted. But I know it's still out there, waiting. And the whispering never stops.